Season 2, Episode 22, Daniel Krasa, Learner Profiles 4.
This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. On this episode, I'm delighted to bring you another Learner Profiles episode. And this is the episode where we go behind the journey of a polyglot. In this case, it's a hyperpolyglot, Mr. Daniel Krasa, who's sharing his journey today on how he got to where he is today. And along the way, he shares a lot of tips and tricks about learning languages, methods, studying, and also how he got his career in languages as well. So it's a really great episode, and I really hope you enjoy it. And as always, I'm happy to hear your comments, questions, anything. Actualfluency.com, you can find the contact button up top, and I'll be delighted to hear from you. And this episode is the last episode of the second season. I was debating a little bit how many episodes to do each season, because I knew that I needed a break in between the seasons to, refresh my batteries, and also to find new guests, set up everything technical, and book the guests is also a big part of it. And that's why this episode 22, I thought it was a pretty good number. It's also my birthday, and it's not my birthday today, but my birthday is on the 22nd in a month, March to be specific. If anyone wants to send me a cake, I love cake. But anyway, I digress. I thought 22 episodes would be quite good going forward. I know that the first season was 50 episodes, but back then I didn't really know I was going to do seasons. I just thought I was going to do episodes until forever. And actually, I became aware of the season concept by other podcasts, and I realized it's a good idea to, have a natural break, kind of like a TV show. You do a lot of episodes every week, and then suddenly you take a break of a month or so, and then you're back. Some TV shows take longer, but I just decided that 22 weeks is good. Then that would be 44 weeks in the year of broadcasting, and that leaves 8 weeks, so 2 months, one at each end, if I'm not mistaken, and that would be a good amount of time for me to, recharge. Sometimes it can be quite a lot of work to do all these podcasts, and I love doing them, don't get me wrong, but it's great to have a month where I can refocus, find out what I want to talk about in the next upcoming month. Do I want to have any solo episodes? And invite the guests, most importantly, because some of the guests are really busy, and you need to organize the interviews far in advance. With regards to season 3, I know that you're probably excited to hear what's going to be new and upcoming. I gave away a little bit on the blog, actualfluency.com. I posted an update titled the 31st of August update, and you can read a little bit there. There are some tidbits, but basically what's going to happen with the podcast is not much is going to change. The biggest change is that I'm going to be starting to do the interviews live, where permitting, which means that we're going to be using Google Hangouts. And to be honest, I always thought that the podcast was a great conversation. It's not really an interview per se, so I thought that Google Hangouts would be an absolutely perfect place, because it's a very casual sort of setting, and it fits the format of the podcast well. And this also allows me to get some video content with the guests that I can do that with. Of course, if the guest does not have a webcam, or it's impossible to get a webcam, most computers have webcams these days, so it's not going to be a problem. But in the event that a really interesting guest doesn't have a webcam available, it's just going to be an audio, and that's okay too. But I wanted to make the content available. I wanted to show more, and I like to put a face on it, to put a face on who's speaking. And also, it gives me the chance, or more importantly, gives you the chance to actually join in on these interviews. So they're still going to be published on Fridays as audio, but instead of only audio, there's also going to be a video, and that's going to go on YouTube. And you have to. It's very hard to plan these things when I'm going to record and stuff, but I'm usually going to be recording on Thursdays with most guests, and then you have to stay tuned on Twitter or on Facebook, where I'm going to be posting the link to the interview, hopefully a little bit in advance, but sometimes with the guests, it's hard to plan everything too far in advance, but I'll try and do my best and share that. And with all that being said, I'm really excited for a new series, a new season, and I'm going to continue the Learner Profile series. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to bring back a solo episode. I already have a solo episode in mind. I'm going to be bringing that back. And as always, I'm really interested in what you guys want to hear about out there. What kind of guests would you like me to get on? Are there any names specifically? I know some of you sent me requests, and it's great, and I'm contacting those people to get them on. But if you have any other requests for the upcoming season, now is the perfect time to email me. And as a last note, before I go on to the interview with Daniel Krasa, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for commenting, and thank you so much for subscribing. And you guys, you're the reason I do this. It's also for myself. I don't want to pretend I don't get anything out of it as well. But I'm really living off the hype or the excitement that you guys bring when you say, wow, I really listen every week. I love your interviews, and this interview was really great. But you know what? I also love it when you guys say, this interview wasn't so great. I think you could have done that better, because that allows me to grow as a podcaster as well. And that's what's most important. If I just sit here and not try to be a good podcaster, then for me the whole concept goes out the door. I want to be better, I want to do better, and I want to give you guys a better podcast. So thank you so much for listening all this way, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode with Daniel. I definitely enjoyed recording it. So with that being said, have a nice late summer, and see you on the other side. All right, everyone, I'm back with another episode of the Actual Fluency podcast, and my guest today is a published author of phrasebooks, dictionaries, and language learning materials, and he's also a frequent traveler. So please welcome Mr. Daniel Krasa to the show.
Hello. Nice to be with you.
Nice to have you here, and this interview has obviously been a long time coming, since the Berlin Polyglot Gathering, where I met you and was completely amazed by your language ability. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me with you.
Fantastic. All right, so the first question in everyone's mind surely must be, how on earth did you get into the world of language learning in the first place?
I don't know. I think I was always kind of really interested in languages from the very start, and I grew up in a purely German-speaking surrounding and family. Nevertheless, my grandparents used to speak some other languages, Hungarian and Czech. They didn't speak any of these with me, but I was still exposed to these languages. And at a very early age, I kind of realized, because my family comes from both Austria and from the south of Germany, and I realized that there were different dialects being used in our family, and I think that might have given me some exposure to simply realizing that there are different ways of saying things, different ways of pronouncing words, and so on. And at the age of 4, 5, I used to, I started to travel with my family, with my parents, and at a very early age, I realized, okay, there are several languages that my parents speak, and then there are languages that other people speak in the world, and I just got tuned into these differences. And at the age of 10, I believe, my parents sent me to a French-speaking high school just because they thought it was good, and my best friend went to that same school, so I wanted to go there anyways. So I learned French as a first foreign language, and I think that kind of opened up my mind to other languages. Like for German speaker, learning French is more difficult than learning English, and that made it a bit more easy to learn other Romance languages afterwards. And so at the age of 12, I started to learn English, and then out of my own interest, I started to learn Spanish and Turkish because I had a lot of Turkish-speaking friends. So I wanted to learn Turkish. I learned Spanish because I thought it was an interesting language. And my parents always supported me. I mean, they always tried to, support me with the books I needed, or they were even finding some private tutors for classes. And and then in school I learned Russian and Spanish as well. And by that time, I think by the age of 16, I already spoke about maybe 5 languages pretty well. And I decided that's the path. That's what I want to do. And then due to my Turkish, I got into Arabic later on. I got a private tutor from Sudan, a very nice gentleman. And and if you learn a lot of languages at an early age, then I think it's just really sets your mind to this. And obviously afterwards it's going to be much easier then, right?
It's a springboard. In
essence. It is. Yeah.
Amazing. And then you decided at your late teens that you wanted to essentially live this lifestyle, and then how did you pick a major from languages and had a career in mind, or did you just kind of go with it?
Not really. It was interesting that the languages, although they were always my main hobby and interest, I always regarded them as something additional to some other things. So when I finished my high school and when I started to think about what I wanted to be, I first of all had in mind to become a diplomat, and then I thought I would be, going to international business, and I always regarded these languages as something that could help me to fulfill an international profession. But I never regarded the languages as such as, the thing I would work with. And for a certain reason, I started to be interested in exotic languages. Like I was very interested in Oriental languages, mainly Arabic. And I kind of specialized as a minor. I studied political science because I told you I wanted to become a diplomat, so I thought it would be interesting to be some sort of a specialist in politics, or become a journalist eventually. And but as a minor, I studied Arabic in Vienna, and I kind of became not specialized, but I had an interest in some dialects of Northern Africa. And there is a publisher in Germany. They publish phrase books about on all sorts of languages. And they asked me at a very early stage, I was 21 at that time, whether I would be interested in writing a phrase book on Algerian Arabic, which is like really a niche product, obviously. And I said yes. So I started to write, and then there was another project, and then there was a third project, and so on. Always like small things, but all language related. And I never realized that actually these things that I was doing parallelly were eventually becoming the things that I could live off. And after 10 years of writing, I have suddenly felt, okay, now leave this idea of becoming a manager and working in international business, or just stop thinking of becoming a diplomat. Just concentrate on what you really like and what you really have a passion for. And that was from the very start of course always languages. So I just started to focus on language learning and on editing, writing books and material about this, core project that I would call languages.
And of course, most people will probably know you, or maybe not directly, but they will definitely know the SAMEL series, which you've been contributing to. And as a product, how did you get involved with that? Because that must have been a huge task compared to a phrase book.
Right. So the phrase books that I wrote, and others in the series, obviously, were at a certain time translated into French. And I was in Paris one day and went to a bookshop, and I saw these, and I thought, wow, this is interesting, because the format looks exactly like the ones I was used to in Germany. So I looked into them, and I found out that it was just a translation into French. So since I was, speaking French at quite a good level, I thought, okay, I want to translate my own books into French if ever they decide to translate mine. Now, think of a book like Algerian Arabic in French. That would definitely be more successful than in Germany, for obvious reasons. So I contacted SAMEL, and I asked them whether I could translate some of my books into French, and they said yes. And so we were first of all working on these phrase book series, and after that they asked me if I would be interested in translating the language material, like the methods, like the textbooks, into German, from French into German. And that's how I ended up translating a couple of them, Arabic and Brazilian Portuguese and Hindi, and right now I'm working on Persian.
Wow, that's really exciting to have. I mean, I guess that was part of a change for SAMEL, because previously only been in French, as far as I know, or maybe they went to English second and then French. German.
No, they actually they started to do a lot of work in other languages as well, and they started to publish in German about 40 years ago. So there are a lot of these books in German, but also in Italian, in Spanish, and in other languages, Russian, Turkish, English, obviously. Yes.
Yeah. The English ones are becoming very popular because everyone knows English in some capacity, it seems.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's also interesting for people out there who want to know how to make a career out of language. If you start with a tiny little project somewhere, suddenly that leads to another one, and then suddenly you get the call from SAMEL or whatever, so.
Exactly. And I think if the drive is to work with languages, you should start with whatever project you have, even if it sounds ridiculous in terms of income and money. If it's something that you're really interested in, go for it, because this is going to open up doors, and it's just going to lead you somewhere else. And if I had not written this book on Algerian Arabic, which obviously I hardly sell, I mean, I could probably get 2 or 3 pizzas a year, now a little more maybe, but for what I earn on this book. But it doesn't matter, because it opened up new contacts, and it's the more exotic the language you're interested in. If you publish something, then you're gonna be some sort of, not a specialist in it, but you're gonna be out there. You're gonna be on Amazon. You're gonna be on the net, and people will find you because you've done something on that particular language, and that's the main thing.
Exactly. It's like you're putting your name out there with a book or a
Right.
project. And you see that in every single category where somebody's, you have to start small. You can't just become a full-time overnight.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's sometimes it might be depressing if you look what kind of things you find about all different languages, and you would say, oh, there's already so much about it, so why should I publish something? No, if you have a good idea, then go for it. Just do it, and try to publish it, even if you don't find a publisher. I mean, there's so many possibilities now on the net in terms of ebooks and other stuff, where you can actually publish your own thing and see how the reaction is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Amazon is, anyone can publish on Amazon, so
Exactly.
just need the text, which, to be fair, is the hard bit anyway. So
it is, yes.
It makes sense. Writing the book. So going back to the learning aspects, how did you feel the difference between, or should I say, how did the method or the approach to language learning change from when you were, let's say, in your teens to now later when you're learning languages as an adult?
You mean besides the effect of alcohol on my brain ever since?
Right. Well, it could make you more creative, I suppose. But yeah, just in general, what kind of, I guess it's a question of development, how have you developed as a learner over the years?
Right. I mean, I would think that everybody believes that the younger you are, the easier it is to learn. I'm 39 right now, and for some reason, it's true because when you're young, you just absorb things, you just pick them up, and you hardly forget things. And there are certain languages that I learned at an early stage that for some reasons they're just there. They don't disappear. I mean, I've lived in Brazil when I was 22, I think, and Portuguese never really. Although I'm hardly speaking Portuguese these days, but I never lost it, and it's there. And when I meet someone speaking Portuguese, I could just instantly get back into it. And I believe it is because I learned it at an early stage, and I was completely, in a Portuguese-speaking surrounding. However, I think it took me quite some time to establish and create my own system of learning. And I believe that when I was young, I lost a lot of time because I thought that I would have to learn it one way or the other. And it's, there's no secret to it. It's not that I would say now I found the secret formula and now all the languages I'm interested in, I just pick them up. No, that's definitely not the case. But I think you have to find your own way. And I don't think that there is any, as I said, any secret formula. Everybody has a different way of learning languages, and it just depends on you. But you need a certain time to find out what's good for you. Also, what kind of material you should learn. If you really want to learn from a book, or if you want to watch movies in that particular language. It also depends, obviously, which language you're learning and how difficult the language is for you, depending on the former input you had from other languages. Say, for me, learning Oriental languages is not that difficult anymore because I was exposed to Turkish and Arabic at an early age. So other languages such as Urdu or Persian, they were just kind of, I wouldn't say easy, but it was of course easier to learn them because I already knew a lot of the vocabulary, all the words derived from Arabic and from Turkish and so on. So whereas somebody who's never learned an Oriental language would need much more time. So it's, there are a lot of factors playing with it. But I believe that nowadays I simply know what the focus is, and I simply know what's important for myself to learn a new language. And that's the reason why it might be easier at some point, even though remembering some new words or some new structures might take a little longer than they did when I was young or younger, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess what also I often say is that people who come into this and listen to an episode, or they just find out about this whole polyglot, the thing that you can actually be a learner as a hobby, which for many school children seems a little bit of a dystopia, but they ask, like, what is the secret? What is the method that I need to use to do this? And everyone says, or at least anyone who's done it for more than 2 months says that it's it's just spending the time and working on it. There's no magic recipe or anything, but you can of course improve the method so it suits you better. But I think what you said, that there is no secret, is worth repeating, because there is truly no secret. I've interviewed 70 people and I haven't found it yet. So if it's out there, it's really well hidden.
Yeah, for me, the main thing, first of all, is to really fall in love with the language you want to learn. I mean, you have to find the passion for that particular language, and we have to say, like, besides the languages that you have to learn in school, most of the languages you would choose during your lifetime are languages that you have a certain connection with, either because you want to live there or because you need them for your job or whatever. But each and every language gives you an insight into a culture, into a country or several countries. So yeah, try to find what's interesting in that particular culture or country, or about the people, about the mentality, and just try to see it as a passion. Try to see it as a love affair, and then it will be much easier than just looking at it as a task, at something you have to fulfill, something you have to do, because that's an obligation, and we don't want to have obligations. And I'm telling you, whenever I sit down with my books and my vocabulary lists and my whatever podcasts and CDs, I'm completely passionate about it. I really love to sit down and learn languages. It's great for me. It's you could call it a meditation or something. It's something that really fulfills me, and that gives me a lot of energy and a lot of good feelings. And I think that's the main thing. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be, like I said, a task. And what you have to keep in mind as well is that language learning, if you decide to learn a certain language, it's never gonna be, I want to learn this language until that particular point. I mean, we always have in mind that, okay, I want to speak whatever Chinese at C1 level. Okay, but it doesn't end there. If you manage to go for a C1 exam in Chinese and you pass it, that doesn't mean that it's going to be there forever. Language learning, if you decide to learn Chinese, let's say, it's going to be, or it should be, a love affair for the rest of your life. And there's always something new to learn. I mean, think of your mother tongue. Even that is never complete, and it's just, you just have to continue to read, you have to continue to watch movies, and so on and so on. But that's the fun about it. You should really look at it from that angle. It's fun, and it's about having a great time.
Exactly.
And for me, the magic about language learning is that with each and every language, like I said, you should find out what's brilliant about the mentality of the people, about the culture, about the country. So whenever you learn a new language, you somehow pick up a new personality. You somehow pick up something new. And I remember, like I said, when I came back from Brazil, I was frequently calling friends over there on the phone. That was before Skype and before, WhatsApp and all these gadgets we have nowadays. So I was calling my friends, and people that were around me, when they heard me speaking Portuguese, they said, "We don't recognize you. You're not the same person. I mean, you behave differently. You have a different pitch of voice and so on. So you change." And I think that's bound to happen. I mean, when you learn a language, try to get into it as much as you can, and you're gonna eventually absorb something from the people you're dealing with in that different language, and so you somehow create a new personality, and that's fantastic. That's really great. So it's language learning is also about acting a little bit sometimes, even though the acting becomes natural.
Right. I don't remember who said it. I think Luca Lampariello told me that for every language he learns, he feels like he's living another life. So he's like, for his 12 or something, he feels like he's living 12 lives at once, because so many doors open and so many,
Exactly.
just a way to think, really. You start to understand how other people think in different cultures.
Exactly. And you could say things in one language that would sound extremely strange in another language. You could address people in a different way, and it's that's the fun about it, and that's what. But having said that, what I also want to say is that language learning is not only about learning vocabulary, grammar, and structure, syntax, and so on, but it's about observing how the locals, deal with each other, the way they speak, things they say that you wouldn't say in your own mother tongue, for example. So there's much more about it. It's like each and every language is like a whole universe, like a new universe that you start to absorb and to learn about. So yeah, how would you just do it in a couple of months? I mean, it has to be a lifelong passion, as I would call it.
Right. And obviously, you've probably used every method there is, but what have sort of been? Do you have any methods that you might have liked at some point, or let's say approaches also, so you can cover more? But when you were sitting down to learn a language, do you focus on the vocabulary? Do you focus on the syntax or the grammar, or like how do you approach if I told you had to learn a new language starting tomorrow?
I would, although I'm working for SAMEL and I'm working for other publishers, I would not say that there is one method that is the only one that works or the best one. No. What I normally do is I try to get myself a few language learning material, whatever, books and CDs, in order to not only stick to one. I really have a very hard time with following just one particular course because there's always some question that might pop up, and I would say, oh, I actually want to be, a step ahead, and I want to learn about whatever the, I don't know, whatever cases and this and that. So I try to get myself decent material, which is normally 2 textbooks. I try to get a grammar. I try to get at a very early stage. What I really love is to get some music in that particular language. So I try to listen to the language, even if I don't understand a word. It's still it's great. And I mean, we have just tune into YouTube or listen to online radios, and so just try to get an idea about the language and listen to it as much as you can. If if it really depends on the language, obviously, because I've been doing some things with rather exotic languages, and there it was really difficult to get material as such. So I try to get what I could, and then try to work out as much as I could with the material. Nevertheless, language is obviously a living thing. So you have to at some stage you have to try to speak to locals. You have to speak to natives, and so for me it's quite helpful because I live in both Frankfurt and Vienna, and they're both international cities, and then it's kind of easy to speak to people in different languages. If you don't manage to do it, then still try to watch YouTube and try to get exposed to the language as much as you can. And besides that, I'm just classically following the textbooks. I'm trying to learn the vocabulary, and I always have some additional material. I try to get myself cartoons, for instance. I'm a big fan of Tintin. Mm-hmm. And you get Tintin in most languages nowadays, which is great. You could read Asterix, you could read Mickey Mouse, whatever, Donald Duck. Yeah, you get all of these in all sorts of languages, and it's fantastic because cartoons teach you spoken language. They teach you really the way things are said by very normal people. So yeah, the core information I want to give is I try to get as much material as I can, which does not mean that I have to spend a lot of money, because there is such a lot of stuff on the internet in every language.
Definitely.
So try to, to get into it as much as you can, and surround yourself with the language, and and obviously follow the textbooks, follow the courses that you're having. If there is a chance of taking courses at an institute, that might be helpful. It really depends on the school and institute. Sometimes you shouldn't forget, if you sit in a classroom with 20 people and the only one who speaks the language is actually the teacher, it might in some cases not be very helpful, but that's, not a general thing. If you don't feel about learning in a classroom, then do it on your own. I normally do it on my own, and I try to find people who speak the language as a mother tongue, so I try to practice with them. But,
It's more efficient, yeah.
Yeah.
And what about learning multiple languages at once? Because we are often inspired or maybe attracted to new languages. And for instance, I'm in Hungary right now, so I'm learning Hungarian. But then you get like you said, you get attracted to some languages and you want to learn more at the same time. But is that wise? Have you been doing that?
Of course, I've been doing it, and I do it all the time because once you speak several languages, you always have to try to maintain the languages as such as well. So you eventually end up reading newspapers in all sorts of languages at the same time, and even if it comes to learning new languages, I'm just too curious about so many languages. I couldn't just say, okay, now for the next 6 months I'll concentrate on Hungarian and I don't look at any other language. No, I wouldn't be able to. I'm too passionate about all sorts of languages. Nevertheless, I think you can train to speak and to learn languages that are in a way alike at the same time, but I wouldn't suggest to do it. So that means if you want to learn Italian and Spanish, then don't learn it at the same time, because it might confuse you. Now, having said that, if you already have a very good knowledge about Italian, then you could get into Spanish and you could still try to work on your Italian at the same time. But if you really start learning two languages that are similar, it might be too much. But it depends. It really depends. The same thing about Slavonic languages. I think if you learn, say, Polish and Bulgarian, that would be easier than learning Polish and Czech at the same time, because these languages are so similar. So I don't think that there is a general rule to it. But if you learn several languages at the same time, I would rather suggest to make sure that they're not too too alike. So better choose languages that don't belong to the same language family, for instance, or
Right, and if you have to have similar languages, make sure they're on very different levels to avoid interference as much as possible.
Exactly. If you are at several with several languages at different levels, then it might be okay. But it all depends on training. I mean, you can really train. I remember when I was living in Brazil, I was working for an advertising agency, and I had to deal with a lot of Spanish-speaking people at that time, and that was at the beginning it was a real headache, because the languages are similar. So I always mixed up the two languages and got confused. But after a couple of weeks, after a couple of months, my brain figured out how to make the division between these two languages, and then it was easier. And with learning, it's the same thing, but it might be confusing at the beginning. Yeah.
Right. And what do you think about all these flashcards, Anki, Memrise, these new basically software, or let's say digitizing the old, writing something on a piece of paper and then on the back write the solution or translation?
I think it's great. I mean, I'm still kind of old school when it comes to this because I'm still writing down words with a pen on a piece of paper. But I believe it's fantastic if you use Anki and you use it on your smartphone, and when you're on your way to the office in the morning and on the way back in the evening, and you have time to look at all the cards, and you don't have to carry books and vocabulary lists and whatsoever all the time. So yeah, of course, it's fantastic. I mean, there's so many great gadgets now, so many things you can do, and I'm really, I think it's really great to use these gadgets, especially for all this memory kind of thing of learning vocabulary. But you shouldn't end there. Languages, as I said, languages is something that is alive, and you have to learn it. Also to use it and speak to people, and that's the main thing. I mean, you could learn 5,000 words in a language and then still not be able to utter words when it comes to just ordering some food in a restaurant.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you have to apply it. You have to use it.
That's so true. Yeah.
Mm.
and a lot of people, I think, do fall into that trap. And I did myself with Russian, where I learned 1,000 words or something quite quickly, but I couldn't really convert that vocabulary into speaking because I just hadn't done that. So I think that the opposite approach is actually a lot better, where you learn some sentences so you can see the pattern, you can observe the pattern, and then you learn some vocabulary so you know what to fill in.
Definitely.
Rather than the other way around.
Right, but I still think that this is the second step. I mean, there is the saying, what is more important, pronunciation or grammar? And obviously, it is pronunciation. You could speak a language and make a lot of mistakes with grammar, and still people would understand you. However, if you don't manage to pronounce words correctly, that's the main obstacle. Yeah.
And then they're harder on you in some parts of the world than others. Like in Hungary, for instance, you get very weird looks if you don't pronounce the words correctly.
Exactly.
Whereas in Scandinavia, you can get away with it, or in English-speaking countries, maybe.
Exactly. Or try languages such as Thai or Vietnamese or Chinese. I mean, you might end up in jail just for having said something you really didn't intend to.
Right.
No, I'm joking. But it's pronunciation is very, very, very important.
So how do we learn that to start out with when we don't have any base in the language? Do we go out and find a tutor to start with, or do we find an audio material that has a solid pronunciation trainer?
Well, audio material is great, and it's probably for most people the only solution there is, because they would not. I mean, even there depends on the language you're learning, but it might not be very easy to find a Vietnamese tutor everywhere, So audio material is great for the drills. Nevertheless, you always listen to yourself, and you would always think either, okay, I'm saying it correctly, or, I don't get into it at all. But none of these two assumptions might be correct. So the best is obviously to speak to someone who speaks the language as a native language, like as a mother tongue, and try to get the feedback from that people. It doesn't have to be a tutor, but just try to go to your local Vietnamese and just say a few things and ask them what they think. Like if it comes to Asians, they would probably be too polite to tell you that it's not correct in some way. No, I made that experience, but they would still, by their looks, you would come to know whether they understood or not. So that's the core thing. That's the most important thing. Try to get to someone who speaks the language, and get the feedback from these people.
Right, and a good enough pronunciation, or a good pronunciation. What should we aim for? What's your philosophy?
I think that's a personal thing. Like you might, depending on the language you speak, you might end up speaking a language without an accent, and people might think you're local. And in other languages, it simply doesn't work. Like I remember, whenever I speak Russian, I would just have to say one word, and every Russian-speaking person would know he's a foreigner. And I've been studying Russian for a long time, and it's frustrating at some point, but it's because I would love to not be taking for a foreigner when I speak, but that's just, that's my ego. So obviously people understand what I'm saying, so that's the most important thing. And I think that is what it's all about. I mean, you should get your message across, and you should just be able to make yourself understood. That's the main aim. Now, if you have achieved this, you can work on it. But then it depends. Like if you obviously, like yourself, if you decided to go to Hungary, so you would have a different benchmark of what you want to achieve than someone who travels to Italy once a year for 2 weeks and just wants to order a cappuccino in a coffee shop. That's it really depends on what your demands are, what's your aim, where you want to be. But generally, yes, I mean, you should try to get yourself understood. That's the main thing.
Right. And it's not always easy.
It's not always easy. Exactly.
Easy.
That's the first step. Now, once you've achieved this, then you can work on it. But you don't need to be a secret agent in each and every language not to be recognized by the locals. So. Yeah.
Sometimes it has an advantage too, because then they speak maybe slightly slower, maybe they pronounce it a little bit more.
It does.
And then it helps you out, and you don't get crucified for any mistake because they think, okay, he's foreigner, so.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're happy that you're trying as well. Probably even more happy than if they heard the perfect language.
Right.
So there's beauty in the impurity anyway.
Yeah, and in some languages, when it comes to exotic languages, like when I say exotic languages, I mean exotic languages for us Europeans, because there's no such thing like exotic and non-exotic. That's not so colonial in a way. It's terrible actually to say that. But yeah, let's say if you speak a language such as an Indian language, for instance, and you speak to people, it would be sometimes more difficult if you really speak, at a very high level and don't look Indian, than if you just ask where's the main station, and people would look at you and say, oh wow, he's a foreigner and he manages to speak a little of our language. So sometimes people don't understand you even though you speak perfectly, almost. It depends on the language. If they're not exposed to foreigners speaking the language, then it might be less helpful to speak at a very high level. But of course, that's then to be decided once you reach there.
Yeah, that's a bridge I'll cross when I get there, I would say.
Yeah.
But you spoke briefly of maintenance before, and that's obviously also a topic that many people might fear a little bit, because they're thinking, wow, it's really hard to learn one language. How can I, after I've learned a language, learn a new one and keep the other one alive, and then add one for every for every new language you learn, of course. But how do you deal with maintaining all your languages, because you have quite a few?
Yeah, I don't really manage to maintain all of them at the same level all the time. It's impossible. And there are languages that I don't use these days, and then still, once in a while I try to read some stuff. But I'm busy with projects I have, and I don't have the time to maintain all the languages at the same time. So I think you have to live with it. But it's true that once you've managed to reach a certain level, let's put it another way. If your aim is to get to a certain point in a language, say you're traveling to a country once in a while and you want to have a decent conversation with people living there, you want to master all the stuff that you need during a trip, say making reservations at a hotel, ordering food in a restaurant, asking the taxi driver to take you wherever, doing a little small talk with people, going to market, buying things. If that is your aim, then try to aim a little higher. Try to aim at reading easy articles in the newspaper. Once you've managed this, then you will see, even if you don't use the language for a certain time, then getting back to it, at least the things that were your initial aim will still be there, which means I think you can kind of get to a point in whatever language where you will be always more or less at home, which means even if you don't use the language, it might not take a long time to get back there. And my experience is that there's certain languages that I hardly use, and still when I get back to speaking them, they come back at a certain pace. It's not like initially everything is there, but once I'm getting into it, it's like opening a drawer in your brain that you haven't opened for a very long time, and you feel like, oh wow, yeah, there's certain words that come back because there is a connection to saying other things. So it's linked, and it works. But the main thing is you should try to aim a little higher at what your initial demand or your initial need in that particular language is. I think that's quite a good idea to start with.
Right, because then if you, I guess that's the old goal setting technique, isn't it? If you aim for the moon and hit the stars or whatever the saying is, you still come a long way.
Exactly.
But I guess there is also an adverse effect sometimes if you say, oh, I want to be C2 in Russian in a year, and then when 8 months have passed, you can barely, keep up a small talk conversation. Then you're like, okay, and you get demotivated, and maybe you just quit because you're like, oh yeah, there's no way I'm making that goal. But by just saying I want to be slightly better than what I need, then it should be attainable as well, and you shouldn't really be demotivated if you don't quite get there. But it's still better than just saying. I mean, you shouldn't make your goals too easy too, right? So
exactly, I think that's the main thing. Yeah, it's difficult to set goals because they shouldn't be either too high or too low. So yeah.
So how do we do that? Just a little bit more than we need. That's the philosophy.
Well, even there, of course, it's an individual task because it really depends what you want to achieve. Say, if okay, I'm going to travel to, let's say, I don't know, to Thailand in 4 months, and I want to be able to, deal with the main situations that might arise during my trip. Then try to focus on this. But if you've never learned any Thai before, then it would be stupid to think, okay, I want to watch television and the news and understand everything, because it would be too far. So yes, I mean, you have to get a certain idea in what you want to achieve, and really, I don't think you could say what is the right aim, but the aim is always, I think, to use the language with locals and to speak to locals. So you could set your goal at unlike you need the language for some business and other purposes where you have to read stuff and all. But if you start with the language, normally the main goal should be that you want to communicate and converse in that language. So you could set yourself a goal, even if you don't travel to that country. You could say, okay, now in 2 months I want to go to my favorite Italian restaurant, and I want to have a decent conversation with the waiters in Italian, and I want to speak about where they're from in Italy. I want to know whether they're married. I want to know what they think about life in wherever you are, and so on. So you set small goals and you prepare yourself for that particular communication, and you try to to steer the conversation in that direction so that you're prepared to speaking about certain issues, and that would be a great goal, But it's a very detailed thing already, so you really know where you want to get, and that's far easier than saying I want to be at A1 level after 2 months in Finnish or whatever,
Right.
I do really like these levels that we have these days, and it's great because you can elaborate on that, and you could say, okay, I have to learn this and that in order to get there. But it's just a method to kind of schedule where you are, but it's not the language as such. You could say I'm at, as we said, you could be at C1 in a language and still have difficulties in speaking to people, although you might read the newspapers, So yeah.
Yeah, you can have different levels for different tasks. So
For different tasks, right?
So you could say, well, I can speak German at C1, but I can only write it to B2 or maybe even A2. It's a very hard language to write. But we kind of have to guesstimate the level in a way because it's a full package. And if I don't need to write in German, then there's no need for me to be C2 in writing German. So that's just the way I look at it. But the levels are quite useful, but I particularly enjoy the levels because they're a standardized tests, so you can actually objectively say what your level is. Whereas if you just say, okay, I'm B2, well, we're our worst evaluators, right? I mean, we always either be too optimistic or too pessimistic. So it depends on your personality, I think. But I think,
and sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to say most people are probably likely to overstate their abilities if they had the choice. But some people would definitely be too humble and say, oh, I'm just A1. And they're probably B2 or something. I've heard that before. It's quite funny.
Yeah, but what you said about being standardized, I totally agree with it. But it is true mainly of languages that are in a way established. Now, if you like myself, I'm writing textbooks and material for learning languages, and I came across the problem that for some languages, although you might have lists of vocabulary of words that you have to include, some of these words might not be used in a language. So it's difficult to elaborate and say, okay, now I'm like, for instance, I wrote, it's already finished, a textbook on a language called Lovari. It's a dialect of Romani. Romani is the language of the Roma, the Gypsies. And there it was very difficult because you could simply not say that a word that is used in other European languages very often, but it's not used in Romani. So it's difficult to standardize, and I think that's what's happening all the time. And you try to set up rules how to fit a certain language into a certain box, then it might not work. But yeah, still, I mean, it's helpful for us to know where we stand and where we want to go.
Yeah, one of my least favorite things in the world has to be the American the SAT, sorry, SRT is something else, SAT test, where the whole aim of the test is for students to study words that they are never using in order to get a high mark on a vocabulary test, which is completely ludicrous. And all the words in there are never used. It reminds me of we used to do in school in Danish. We used to do these tests where we had to copy what the teacher was saying. And that was great for spelling and everything. And then for the final exam, the teacher used a word, and nobody knew what it was. Right. And it was like, it was such a specialized word. It's it comes from French, so you'll know it. It's the word where when animals are looking for food. In Danish it would be forager, but in English it would be forage, which would be a very, I guess that's kind of useful, but in Danish that's like, nobody would ever say it, let alone know it.
Okay.
So we were just baffled, and that experience totally led me to hate the SAT test, because why would you need to know words that nobody uses? I mean, I love fancy words in English. It's probably the best language for fancy words. But if the person you're talking to doesn't understand it, then what's the point of learning it?
Yeah.
So yeah, but that was my rant on SATs anyway. But yeah. Anyway, it's time's up, unfortunately.
Okay.
As it always is with when you're having fun, time flies. But it's been such a pleasure to hear about your story and your kind of philosophy with language learning. And
is it? Oh, thank you.
yeah, well,
Thank you for saying that.
I'm speaking for myself here, selflessly. But if people have any comments, I'm sure they'll leave it. And if you don't hear anything, it was amazing. That's how the internet works. If there's a shred of bad in an episode, then you get 10 emails, and if it was a great episode, you don't hear anything.
Okay, great.
But either way, yes. And I was gonna actually talk about Berlin, because that's where I first met you at the Polyglot Gathering, and I guess I'll see you next year there.
Definitely, yes, of course.
And what did you think about the event? What did you get out of it?
It was great. It was my first time at such a conference and gathering, and it was really nice to meet all these great people and to know that there's so many others out there sharing the same passion, the same interest. And it was really fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and it actually gave me a lot of inputs. It gave me a lot of energy to work on some of the languages, as I said, that I haven't used in a long time. So I'm very enthusiastic after it, and it's not at all because I want to compete with anyone there. There was no feeling of competition. You know, it was like a big gathering of friends that all share the same ideas. And as I said, I mean, language is an instrument, and it basically is the interest that we all share. But through language, there's such huge cultural universe opening up, and I think we all have the same passion for that as well. And that was so great, because it was a gathering of people from all around the world, and they all shared their interest and love for languages, and it was simply fantastic to be there. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to next year as well.
The atmosphere was buzzing for sure. That's what I love about it. It's almost electric, and so motivational and inspirational. You just want to. I mean, I almost felt like during the gathering, I would just feel like, I should really go to my room and study a little bit. You really get that urge. But I always recommend it to anyone listening that this is really the event, because it's so casual as well, isn't it? It's like
it is, yeah.
It doesn't feel like a really formal setting with only talks and only, let's say, academic talks. It's
no, and everybody is welcome. I mean, if there's no benchmark for speaking whatever amount of languages. I mean, if you're interested in languages, that's the place for you to be.
Exactly, Berlin, the capital of the polyglot movement.
Exactly.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to share your story today. And I hope to see you somewhere. Actually, if you're in Vienna, I'm in Budapest. That's not too far, so I might come visit you one day.
Great, let's do it. Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for your interest. And I hope that it's gonna be helpful and interesting for some people out there. All right,
I'm
all
sure.
the best.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast.